Movie history is filled with some psychotic serial killers, but you've never seen one like the one in 100 Days to Live. Welcome to the Film Threat Podcast. I am Chris Gore, and I really love the fact that I get to discover all sorts of new independent films that you should be checking out. I want to talk to the filmmaker today behind 100 Days to Live, Ravin Gandhi. Welcome to the Film Threat Podcast. You're in Chicago right now, is that right?
I am.
That's awesome. Your movie, first of all, it's one of those thrillers that kept me guessing up until first of all, it's twists and turns I didn't see coming. And I really felt, and I don't know if you felt this way or this was intentional. It really felt like the movie was influenced by graphic novels, comic books, Batman villains, and I don't want to ruin too much about the actual film, but it's a woman who's terrorized by a killer. Without going into too much detail, you can check out the trailer on YouTube for 100 Days to Live. But I really got this sense that from visually, that it was very much influenced by graphic novel, comic books, and the types of serial killers with like a master plan. I got Joker vibes from this. Can you correct me if I'm wrong, or was that intentional?
Yeah. So first of all, I have always been, starting in the early 80s, a big comic book fan. So my heyday of comic reading was kind of probably 1980 to 1985 when I was sort of like 7 to 15. And I loved the framing of the panels. And so when I was storyboarding my script, that was actually one of the first things I did when I decided to make this movie, having never done it before, is through Google, I found a storyboard artist. So I sat there and described how I thought each, scene would be shot. And I would bring him into this room actually here in my office, and I would lay on the floor and say, here, he's crawling down the hallway. So I want it to be a long shot. And once we got far enough along with my DP, who was awesome, Nick Putz, I showed him my storyboards and said, this is how I see it. And where we could execute it, we did. Of course, with all indie films, we had to toss that out of the window sometimes. But for sure, that was a big influence. And then to your second part of the question, I am kind of a guy who likes to have a plan. So I guess my bad guy had a pretty big plan, which hopefully holds together in the end. But I would say the answer is yes to both of those.
Well, it does hold together, remarkably so. And it's funny that you mentioned that comic books from like 80 to 85, that was kind of a golden age. Actually, if you remember, that was The Dark Knight Returns, Frank Miller. That was Alan Moore's The Watchmen. So if you were a comic book fan just in those 5 years, you experienced some of the most amazing comics like Batman Year One. And I got this vibe from the movie that it definitely was graphic novel, comic book influenced, because it had that sort of grand, like you're constantly peeling an onion of what is going on, and you definitely had me guessing. So it doesn't surprise me that it was well storyboarded. So
it's amazing that you picked up on that in a way, because that's a deep influence, and it's awesome to see that people can, ask me a question. I'm like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. That's like totally cool.
Well, it definitely seemed, and that's a great influence, because in a way, comic books are the cheapest form of filmmaking. Right. I mean,
yeah.
Right. Pen and paper, and you're doing storyboards. So it doesn't surprise me. I don't talk to a lot of indie filmmakers that storyboard, their movie, but this felt that way because everything was so purposeful. And I think to pull off what you did, you absolutely have to take care with, you don't give away this stuff so easily, right? It's sort of like in the delivery of these little scrapbooks, right? Which is this, it's such a cool element of the film, and you certainly put a lot into that. Tell me about like fetishizing over some of these details like that, like those scrapbooks and whatnot. I really feel like the attention to detail on some of the smallest aspects of the movie is part of the success of why it works so well.
Yeah, I don't want to give the plot away, and obviously there are big twists in the movie. But one of the biggest challenges I had before I decided to make this, to actually make the movie was, can I properly motivate the bad guy? And once you understand what his real motivation is, there was a lot of, well, what would I actually do if I was a guy like that? What would visually need to occur for him? And one day it popped into my head, oh, this guy, he follows people around and he's going to take pictures of them and deliver these little scrapbooks, when he kidnaps people. And you don't obviously find out until late in the movie the why of it. But for me, having never made a movie before, I had to just think about, what can I actually shoot here without just talking heads? What's a visual element? And I thought it was cool. Now, I'm a first-time filmmaker. I've never done this before. The first time I was ever on a film set was day one of my production, which was actually in my own house for a lot of it. So I'm sure there's going to be some people who say, X or Y or Z elements of this movie were derivative or seemed like something they saw in another movie. And I would say, look, it's the best I could do. But I hope that for people who get all the way to the end, they go, oh, actually, it's less, similar to what we've actually seen in the past, because I was trying to come from it from an angle that was a little bit perpendicular to the normal serial killer kind of genre from a motivation perspective.
Well, it definitely didn't feel like first-time filmmaker. I feel like you've been making this movie in your head for a while.
Yeah, that's what my crew said, by the way. That's what my crew kept saying.
Oh, good, because it really comes off like this is like, more of an effort of someone who's been making movies for a while. I hope that also, again, it's you just, in speaking about the film, just like myself, I don't want to give too much away about it because I think it would ruin the surprise of it, but I think it's such a well thought through, and I always appreciate this when you're thinking through not just the motivations of your protagonist, but the antagonist, and then sort of some of the reversals that occur in the movie. I would just encourage people to see the trailer, or even better yet, don't watch the trailer. Until you actually get to see the movie. But speaking to the idea of being a first-time filmmaker, what did you do to prep and put yourself in that position? I mean, aside from storyboarding, which is always good advice, I mean, at the very least a shot list, but what prepped you to make something that's such a more mature effort? I mean, maybe parenting has something to do with it too. I think that people that are parents, actually, there's a lot of, just as someone who's produced projects, like I feel like parenting actually prepped me to be a producer. But what can you tell me got you into that place where at least you make it look somewhat effortless?
Well, that's some high praise, and I'm going to take that with a grain of salt because I'm still very insecure about the fact that I made a movie. I have a very different business identity that I've been in for 20 something years, which actually prevented me from chasing this other passion, which was filmmaking. Since I've been in my 20s, I've wanted to make a movie. I'm 47 sitting here today. And so there was decades where I would be flying around the world for work and scrawling ideas on a piece of paper. I had written a number of screenplays. I've never been afraid of getting brutal feedback. Never. I would send my horribly unreadable screenplays to film snob friends, and they would send me 20-page emails saying, this is so bad that let me tell you the 30 reasons why. And I loved that stuff. And I finally got to a point where I wrote a script where people were like, I'm pretty surprised you wrote this because it does seem like there is a there. And so once I crossed that first element of maybe the screenplay is good enough to actually be shot, fate conspired that I sold my business that I started 3 years ago. And even though I'm still the CEO of that business, I did have more time. I wasn't working 100-hour weeks anymore. Maybe I was back to working, 40 or 50-hour weeks. So I had more time to plan. And I am a very, very, very type A driven guy. If I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it to the best of my abilities. Not to say that it's going to be great, but it's certainly going to be not for a lack of trying. So in my case, that meant watching master classes, behind the scenes DVD preps, David Fincher and David Lynch and all of these filmmakers who I love that talk a lot about how they approached it. Werner Herzog did a great masterclass. There was just so many. So I and when I actually started to get my hands dirty and I Googled, how do you find actors in Chicago? A casting director came up named Marissa Ross, who is one of the biggest casting directors in town. And she was so helpful. And she introduced me to a producer who had just made a movie himself and had access to sound guys and camera guys. And so I could build a crew that way. And then it was really about explaining my vision for things. And if there's one thing that I found pretty natural, it was when someone asked me, whether it was my production designer, my location manager, my editor, my cast, what do you want here? Like, that came out of me very quickly. And I found that if you could do that as a director, that's more than 50% there, besides showing up. And I'm pretty good at articulating that stuff. And again, not to say that where I took the audience as a place they want to go or they should have gone, but the crew very quickly realized that there was someone who was steering the ship, for better or for worse.
Well, never would have guessed 47. You definitely have the energy of a young filmmaker, but also I think that, I don't know what your business was, but clearly I think entrepreneurship or running a small business, an indie film is a small business. So the skill set that you developed in this business that you had for 20 years clearly helped prepare you for, to make an independent film. Can you tell me, at least for the filmmakers in our audience, can you tell me what lessons from being an entrepreneur and running that business kind of prepped you for going about making, because not everybody succeeds in the way that you do, where they get a film made and then get it out commercially. So what lessons did you learn from running that business for 20 years that you brought into your now filmmaking life?
That's such a great question. There are so many good parallels between starting, growing, selling, a business and writing a screenplay and then, producing it yourself and directing it and going through post and selling it and doing the festival circuit. I would say lesson number one is embrace the difficulty, because I've mentored a lot of young entrepreneurs and they always say, I have X, Y, or Z idea and should I do it? And what they're really asking me is, am I going to succeed or not? And I can never say you're going to succeed or not. What I can tell you is it's going to probably be 25 times harder than you expect. And there are going to be so many times that you stay up all night going, why did I do this? I'm going to be a public mockery. I'm a total failure. Everything I'm doing here is turning to, mud. So if you go into things expecting that is going to happen and how difficult it's going to be, it's very easy to embrace that difficulty, because if it were that easy, everyone would do it, whether it's starting a business and making it successful or making a film. It's really hard. And when you go into it knowing that and you embrace it, when those inevitable things happen, like in the movie, 2 days before we were shooting in our hospital, we lost the hospital location. Oh, well, we got to go find one while we're in the middle of shooting, while, I'm shooting a 16-hour day. And then I have to go run over with the location manager to a new hospital that blows all my prep and planning and shots and storyboards out of the water. And I didn't get to see the location largely until the day we showed up. I don't sit there and cry about it. I go, okay, let me figure it out. Or when, I didn't know the Hollywood protocols when we started shooting of, block the scene and have the actors come do it, and then have the lighting crew and the gaffer and the DP watch it and let them light it, then come back. Maybe if I never went to film school, maybe they would teach people stuff like that. I was just kind of figuring it out, yelling, telling people to do things. And after a couple of days of my whole crew revolting, saying, look, man, there is a ironclad structure here that Hollywood is used to in terms of, talk to your DP, who will then communicate to, the Steadicam guy or the camera operator or the ACs. As someone who has built businesses that have hundreds of employees, I was used to kind of managing by walking around. And so I learned, I figured it out. Give me 2 days. Okay, cool. I got it, man. And then by day 3, we were up and running, and we shot for 21 days. We never had a day that we didn't make the day. And I was obsessed with it. Another lesson is don't chase perfection, because you will go down the drain. In my head, since I had written the movie, when I saw something I liked at the monitor, I'm like, boom, we got it. That's good enough. I can work with that. Now, if I was Fincher and I had 2 days to shoot this scene, sure, I could go try 100 different things and light it awesome. And, or even, I mean, our lighting was awesome, but I mean, light it differently, but we didn't have the luxury. So I was very good at saying, that's good. Let's move on. Let's move on. Let's move on. There was one thing that my AD was shocked at, is that as opposed to him, it was me saying, we got it. Let's move on. You know, I want to make this stay. And it's just like starting a business. I am responsible for the success of that business. As a director, I am the advocate for the audience. I am responsible for the emotional journey I'm taking people on. And it's all got to be in my head at all times. And the last lesson, so I don't make this a forever answer, is understand that when you are in charge of something, in this case, we had about 70 people in my business, you know, we have a lot more than that. Understand that as the leader, half of leadership is looking like a leader and sounding like a leader and instilling confidence and inspiring people. And that doesn't mean that you always know what you're doing. Okay. A lot of times something would come up and I would say, all right, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to go bam, 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 bam. Let's go. And everyone's like, wow, this guy's like really got it together. You know what was going on inside my head? Oh my God, this is a disaster. We're screwed. We're never going to, this is not going to work, not going to work. That was going on inside my head, but I will never, ever betray that to anyone else. Like that's for me. And so I understood as someone who was used to leading things, how to make sure that my cast and my crew would still believe in me. Because man, if they lose faith in you as a director, it's going to go off the rails. So those, to me, are the lessons that I would say are very applicable as an entrepreneur that translate into this creative endeavor.
First of all, you could go on and on longer with this forever answer if you're cool with it.
Oh, I could, trust me. Yeah.
All of that is so useful. And just as an entrepreneur, and I've been an entrepreneur all my life, I won't say a successful one. I'm one that's not out of business, which I think in you know the times we live in might be considered some form of success. But one thing I know for sure is that independent filmmakers are not always great with money. I feel like in this process and actually continuing to be the CEO of your small business on the side is probably incredibly wise. Not every filmmaker has that luxury, but could you offer some insight or advice in terms of money management? This is very inside baseball. So I hope if you're listening to this or watching this, this is for the filmmakers out there, because I see if there's a common thread and mistake I see more often than other mistakes, maybe in addition to movies that don't turn out so well, is financial mistakes. It's, I'm just going to put it all on credit cards, which might be the worst decision ever. I mean, I think I've said this before, but like if you calculate, if you borrowed $100,000 on credit cards and you paid just the minimum payment, it would take you 30 years to pay, and you pay $300,000. You're better off borrowing money from the mob than you are from a credit card company. So can you offer just some maybe financial like perspective or advice on, successfully getting an independent film made and being a responsible, obviously you're responsible, you're a father, you have your small business on the side and you've made a movie, but I can just tell you from my experience that I've seen so many filmmakers like risk everything. It's like they're making an indie movie is their plan is to go to Vegas and, get and win big. And I think we all know from going to Vegas, you don't always win. I'm not a big gambler, by the way, but I'd like to hear if you have any financial advice or for specifically for filmmakers.
Yeah, my biggest advice would be if you can avoid raising money from outside sources, do that. Because I have seen a lot of indie filmmakers that even when they get as far as we've surprisingly got on this journey where we sold the movie, we have a distributor, it's coming out next Tuesday. They have this added pressure of trying to pay people back. So my advice would be scale your production down to the level where you can make it work and not, lose your livelihood. And these days with technology, you don't have to spend that much money to make a movie that could become a festival darling. So I think that's one big piece of advice. The other piece of advice, I tried to be very creative as well as I could be. I mean, we'll see how the market reacts next week when this movie gets out, or if I get crushed by the critical community or whatever. I'm prepared for all of it. But I have that creative element, as do, everyone who decides to make a movie. But what I also do have, which is rooted in your question, is a financial understanding. And I was stunned through the process how many times I would talk to my co-producers or, people we were renting things from, or, getting permits, or going through the festival process, or dealing with my post-production house, or signing the contracts with my, editors, to the distributor, to sales agents. People were shocked that I had lawyers and that I redlined things, and I sent them back to people and I said, look, this is ridiculous. That's an absolute non-starter, and this is what we're going to do, and take it or leave it. And I saw people's mouth drop open going, oh my God, this is a first-time filmmaker who actually has like the spine to stand up to what, these distributors or these people that are so venerated in the industry. And at that point I was like, look, I'm no longer an indie filmmaker. I'm an entrepreneur. I've been through this road many times, and you're trying to take me to the cleaners. Like, forget about it. And so the advice is, don't just take yes for an answer. A lot of filmmakers are so amazed that this distributor wants to take their movie, or, oh my God, they just take yes for an answer. You don't have to do that. That's why Hollywood has the crappy reputation for indie film, where, no one ever makes any money, and you never get paid, and all those things. And it comes down to one thing, and those things are contracts. Everyone goes by what the contract says, and you can control what the contract says. And, I have lawyers who did that. So I know that is a tall order for someone who was 23 and just out of film school, or something like that. But that was maybe one of the advantages I had, was waiting until I was in my mid 40s to make a film, because I had been through the capitalistic world. But those are two things I would say.
Well, one would hope that the people you're dealing with are honoring the contracts that they agree to. I've heard otherwise in this business sometimes, so one would hope that. Oh my God, Ravin Gandhi, it's been a pleasure talking to you on the Filmmaker podcast. Congratulations on the movie. Your advice is so sound, and so like what needs to be heard. I just think the idea of scaling the film to what you can financially bear, so you're not giving up an equity stake to other partners, is really wise early on. And clearly your entrepreneurial background has prepared you so well to go on this journey. I can't wait to see what you come up with next. I really, really appreciate you talking to us.
Awesome. It was a pleasure. And for anyone who sees this, February 2nd, it's going to be available everywhere, 100 Days to Live. So please rent it, buy it, stream it. If you like it, tell your friends. If you hate it, write a horrible review on IMDb. I'm ready for it, baby.
Well, don't worry. I will say this. Don't worry about the reviews. I think that if one thing I've learned about audiences these days, they don't care about reviews as much as they used to when it comes to critics' reviews. And even Rotten Tomatoes, like, they'll divide it up into like, here's the critics' reviews and here's the audience reviews. And you see what the divide is a lot of times in it. I would say that, like, for the most part, a lot movies these days they get mixed reviews because the opinions of critics are mixed. But then the audience, I think the audience rating is the one that's probably the one that matters the most. So I would end this by saying, fuck the critics. So,
and that's the thing, man, you better be ready for you talked about all the things, that you learn when you make a film. The other thing is you have to have very, very strong armor. And remember I said what might happen during this podcast?
Hey,
come over here.
Someone learned to pick the lock.
Yeah, someone just learned to pick a lock. So this kid is homesick from school. His name's Peter. He makes a cameo in my film. So he's a movie guy. So say bye.
Hey.
Bye.
Yeah, because we're ending the interview right now, bud.
Good to talk to you. You should get back to the most important job, being a parent.
Awesome. It was a pleasure.
Take care. Bye.